Hello everyone. In this tutorial I want to share how I create the adult penguin and chick drawing and the thinking behind it and the little artistic decisions that help brought the piece to life in pastel pencil. This is such a lovely subject because it gives us that balance of softness, structure and lovely colour. So at first glance penguins can seem quite simple, I guess, black, white, a few warm tones around the head, but when you slow down and really look, there is so much more going on. There are cool reflections in the dark feathers, there's warm creams and ivories in the chest, subtle sort of silvery greys along the wing, and those shifts where the sunlight and the environment meet the surface of the penguins. What makes a drawing like this feel believable is not usually extreme detail, but it's how we observe. It's noticing the temperature shifts, those edge changes, the way one shape turns into another, and the way colour sits inside shadow as well as light. So throughout this piece, that is really what I'm paying attention to most. So at this stage, I'm sort of building the drawing gently rather than trying to force it too early. That can be one of the most important things with pastel pencils. It can be very tempting to press hard straight away because you want the image to appear quickly, but that often creates problems later. When too much pigment goes down too soon, we can flatten the tooth of the paper and then we lose the ability to build those soft, rich layers that make pastel pencil work so well. So one thing that really helps here is to think in stages. Light layers first, gently blending, then another light layer, then adjustments. I find that when I work that way, the drawing stays fresh much longer and I can sort of move more, and I've got more room to respond to what I'm seeing. Another thing I'm aware of throughout is that the early stages can look unfinished or patchy or even a little bit messy, and that is completely normal. It's quite often referred to as the ugly stage. Sometimes the paper shows through, sometimes an area looks too pale or slightly uneven. That's just part of the layering process. So in fact, allowing the drawing to stay open in the beginning can often give us more control later on. So when I'm working with the darker areas of the penguin, I'm not thinking of them as flat black shapes. That's such an important shift in mindset. So black feathers are rarely just black. They hold reflected light, environmental colour, and those subtle changes in temperature. So to keep those dark areas realistic, I'm usually building them with a combination of black and cooler notes rather than relying on one pencil alone. What really helps here is bringing a cool blue into the black. That immediately gives the dark feathers more life. It stops them from looking dead or flat, and it suggests the cold environment around the bird. The sky, the snow, the ice, the light bouncing back into the feather surface. Even if that blue is only subtle, it changes, or it can change the whole feeling of the drawing. The same idea really applies to the greys in the piece. So not all greys behave in the same way. Some are cooler, some are warmer, some sit beautifully in shadow, and some are better for soft reflected light. So instead of thinking I need a grey here, I'm trying to notice what sort of grey it is. Is it a cool silvery reflection, a warmer grey inside a feather transition, a muted mid-tone sitting between light and dark? Those questions can make a real difference. So to keep this realistic, I'm also paying close attention to where one area should stay clean and where another can soften. So for example, darker sections that sit beside pale feathers need careful handling because it's very easy to muddy those light areas. So this is especially true with pastel pencils, where a little contamination can travel quite quickly if you're not careful. So I like to work with a fairly light touch, as I've said before, and I'm always aware of keeping the lighter sort of passages protected as much as possible. That also applies when blending. Blending can be incredibly helpful, especially in a subject like this where some of the feathers need a soft, sort of smooth finish, but it needs to be controlled. If everything is blended too much, the drawing can lose its life. So if nothing is softened at all, it can feel scratchy or disconnected. So I'm always looking for that balance. Enough blending to settle the pigment and enough that unifies the passage, but not so much that I lose the structure underneath. So throughout the drawing, I'm paying attention to feather direction as well. Even when the marks are soft, direction matters because it supports the form. It helps the surface feel convincing. Even if the pencil strokes are later blended, those first marks still guide the shape and movement of the feathers. So rather than laying pigment down randomly, I'm trying to follow the natural flow of the bird. This becomes especially important around transitions. When one group of feathers changes angle or turns into shadow, quite often that is where the realism lives. Not in adding more and more, but in getting those subtle direction shifts right. One thing to notice is a piece like this, for instance, is how different the edge quality is from a furry animal. So if I were drawing a fox or a cat, I'd often allow for softer, broken, wispy edges in places, but with a penguin, the form is sleeker. The feather structures tend to read more cleanly, and that means the silhouette often needs a little more control. Not harsh, but controlled. The outer shape usually wants to feel deliberate, and the internal transitions do more of the softening. So as the drawing develops, I'm always weighing up which edges need tidying, which ones can stay soft, and which ones need a clearer value shift to describe the form properly. These small adjustments are often what take a piece from looking coloured in to looking observed. The warmer colours in the penguin are also such a beautiful part of this subject. Those yellows, oranges, creams, and those soft ivories, they bring warmth and character to the piece, and they just sit beautifully against the cooler blacks and greys. What I'm trying to avoid here is making those areas feel too separate from the rest of the bird. Instead, I want them to glow into the neighbouring feathers naturally. That means layering them gently, allowing one colour to sit into another, and using cream or ivory to bridge transitions where needed. Those bridging colours are often underestimated, but they are incredibly useful. They soften the joins, connect the colour families, and help the whole bird feel more unified. There is also warm and cool shifts. The neck and chest in particular can hold a mixture of both. There may be warmth from sunlight, warmth from the local feather colour, and then cooler notes from the surrounding environment. If we make the mistake of treating pale feathers as just white or cream, the whole area again can feel flat. But when we begin to notice that some passages are warmer, some are cooler, and some sit somewhere in between, the surface starts to feel much more alive. A lot of realism in wildlife art comes from that exact sort of thing, seeing subtle temperature shifts rather than just obvious colour. So the wing and the back are another example of this. They may look dark overall, but within those darker passages there are still many small changes. Some parts are deeper and more turned away from the light. Some catch a soft reflection, some hold cooler greys, and some even show slight hints of green or blue in the reflected colour. That is something I really enjoy looking for, because those unexpected little colour notes can transform a drawing. A touch of green in a shadowed wing, or a soft blue-grey reflection along a feather edge can stop a dark section from becoming dull. It adds complexity and makes the bird feel as though it is sitting in a real light rather than existing as a collection of flat shapes. To keep those subtle notes believable, it helps not to overstate them. A little often goes a long way. Sometimes it's just enough to suggest the colour and then soften it back slightly so it becomes part of the whole rather than a separate feature. Okay, reflected light is another key part of this drawing. With birds like this, light doesn't just sit on the obvious highlights. It often catches the feather's surface in, sort of quieter, smaller ways, along an edge, for instance, across the curve of the wing, underneath the chin, or where the light bounces gently back from the surroundings. Those are the moments that give the drawing atmosphere. So when I'm placing lighter tones, I'm not only looking for the brightest areas, I'm also noticing those smaller, softer lifts in value that help describe the turn of the form. Those are often the places that make a drawing feel sort of more dimensional. What really helps here is allowing the highlights to build gradually. In pastel pencil, highlights often work best when they're not just dropped in once and then left. Sometimes they need to be softened, blended back, and then re-emphasised. That way they sit more naturally within the feather structure. Shadows, they're approached as well in a similar way. I'm not thinking of them as one flat dark zone. I'm looking for what kind of shadow it is. Is it cooler because it's open to the environment? Is it slightly warmer because it sits near a warm feather area? Is there reflected colour inside it? Does it have a crisp edge or a soft transition? Asking those questions helps the shadows become part of the form rather than just something placed on top. One of the most valuable things you can do in a drawing like this is just to stay curious about it. Stay curious about the colour inside the shadow. Very often, that's where the richness is. Try not to feel you need to be working toward perfection. Just be curious. As the chick becomes into the piece as well, the approach therefore will shift slightly. The same principles still apply: gentle layers, careful observation, attention to temperature and value, but the texture changes. The adult has a sleeker, more structured quality, whereas the chick feels softer, fluffier, more delicate. So what I'm thinking about here is not just colour, but character of mark. So the chick benefits from softer transitions and a gentler feel overall. The darker features still need enough definition to anchor the face, but the surrounding texture wants to stay soft and downy. Because the chick is smaller, precision becomes a little bit more important in those tiny features, so a sharper pencil can help in the finer areas, not because we want a harsh look, but because small shapes can become bulky very quickly if the point is too blunt. And at the same time, I just still want to preserve softness around it so the chick doesn't become too hard-edged compared to the adult. This contrast between the adult and the chick is really lovely in the finished piece. One has a smoother but more sort of elegant feather structure, and the other has that tender softness that immediately gives a sense of vulnerability and warmth. Capturing that contrast helps the relationship between the two birds feel stronger. As everything starts to come together, I'm stepping back more often and I'm looking at the drawing as a whole. This is where the final refinements start to matter. Not huge changes, just sort of thoughtful ones. Perhaps an edge needs clarifying, perhaps a shadow needs softening, perhaps a highlight has disappeared a little too much and wants bringing back, or perhaps an area needs a small touch of warmth or coolness to help it sit better with everything around it. These finishing stages are often, not too noticeable, but they are incredibly important. They're where the drawing becomes more cohesive. They're where the relationships between the colours and values settle into one another. One thing I'd really encourage you to do with a piece like this is just not to rush those final decisions. Sometimes just pausing and looking carefully tells you far more than just immediately adding another layer. Stand back, squint a little, compare shapes, compare values, and ask yourself what the drawing needs, not what you feel tempted to add out of habit. Very often the answer is less rather than more. And what I love about this subject is that it shows how powerful subtlety can be. This drawing doesn't rely on dramatic detail everywhere. Instead, it relies on relationships. Warm against cool, soft against sharp, dark against light, smooth against fluffy. And when those relationships are noticed and handled with care, the whole piece begins to feel natural and full of life. So if you do decide to draw, I do have the tutorial on my Patreon, and I'll put the link in the description. Take your time, trust the gradual build-up, and don't worry if it looks incomplete for quite a while. Pastel pencil is very much a medium of patience. The beauty often arrives layer by layer, almost quietly, and then suddenly the whole piece begins to settle. I hope this has given you a helpful insight into how I think through a drawing like this and what I'm looking for as the penguin and chick come to life on the page. And I just want to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please do like, subscribe, comment. I'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to draw along, pop across to my Patreon channel and I'd love to see you there too. In the meantime, take care. Bye bye.